Now this is the Citroen C5 X, a car I pretty much fell in love with when I first drove it earlier this year on the international press launch in Spain. Now on that event, the roads were wonderful, the weather was glorious, and I was treated to some delicious food and wine, just like all the other journalists. So when Citroen gave me the opportunity to spend some time with this car here in the UK, I was keen to find out whether all that hospitality had gone to my head. Now I've spent the last 3 weeks with this car. You can tell because it's dusty, it's filthy, it's covered in flies over the front of the car, and all to find out whether I can still say this is one of my favourite cars of 2022. Coming up now is exactly what I think of it. Now I have to say this is a pretty odd looking car, but you could say that about some of the best Citroens ever made. There's a mix of different design themes here. There's sort of an estate car, there's a bit of a fastback, and of course with the raised ride height and this bit of plastic cladding, there's a bit of SUV going on here. And Citroen have done that because they freely admit traditional D-segment cars like the Ford Mondeo, the BMW 3 Series, those traditional 3-box saloons, that segment, if you're not BMW, Mercedes or Audi, is pretty much dying out. So this is why Citroen have tried something a little bit different with the C5X, and I have to say it works. It really does look different on the roads. The only thing I don't like about it are the wheels. Now I don't mean the actual size of them, I mean the width of them. Sometimes you see this car from a distance and it just looks as though it's sitting up a little bit too high. It's a little bit gawky, as if it's sitting on its tiptoes. Apart from that though, I think this is a really good piece of design. Now, one of the things that really impressed me about the C5 when I drove it all those months ago was the interior. And I'm pleased to say, having lived with this car for 3 weeks, the interior still really impresses. There's a few reasons for that. Firstly, the design. Now, we've seen on quite a lot of modern Citroens, such as the C4, Citroen's going for this sort of very flat raised dashboard, and it's all centered around the infotainment system. I'll come on to that in a second, but the design, I just think it's just brimming with lovely little design details. So there's a lot of thought has gone into this dashboard. Now you can watch my full review by clicking in the top right, and there I give a proper in-depth look at this dashboard. Here I'm just giving you just a few highlights that have sort of occurred to me while I've been living with this car for the past few weeks. First thing is this chrome strip that runs across the top of the dashboard. Really nicely designed, that. Further below we've got this soft touch plastic with this sort of interesting design. I think the design actually is repeated in the infotainment system in some of the menus, which is a nice bit of mirroring. And then further down we've got this plastic trim that sort of, it doesn't look like wood, but it's sort of like a wood effect, I don't know, but it's really nice. It helps lift the interior, and that stretches all the way over to the doors, and then it's bookended with this other bit of chrome detailing. The other thing that's good is the quality. Now all up top it's really good. I mean, we've seen this in a lot of recent Peugeots and Citroens, that, you know, there's been a lot of focus on the material quality. And then of course, thank the good Lord, there are some physical heater controls. And I can't tell you, when you're driving along, it's just so nice to think, actually I just want to turn the temperature down, and you just turn that knob. You don't have to go into the center screen at all. Let's talk about that central screen then, the infotainment screen. Now, this has been an area which Citroen and Peugeot haven't really done particularly well over the past few years. They've been overly complicated, poorly designed, and just not particularly nice to use. Here it's much nicer. I mean, it's not completely perfect, but it is a lot better. Now, during my time, I've tried to test out the boot space and all the practicality as much as I possibly could. I've even volunteered to go to the tip which is a pretty unusual thing for me to do, but all in the art of testing. And I have to say the C5X scores pretty well on the practicality front. But yeah, it's a pretty good space, nice and flat. I like the fact that the bumper here is black, so you can actually sort of sit here like this and not sort of fear that you're going to scratch the paint. It's also of a good height, so you can actually put your feet up and sort of change your shoes if you've gone out walking, for example. I even like these little strips you've got here. Reminds me of the strips that you find on the boot floor of the Mercedes CLS shooting brake, if you can remember that car. The seats, they're a 60-40 split fold. There's little handles here, which is handy, and they can fold down. Sometimes you need to give them a little bit of a push. That one's gone down first time. Not a completely flat loading space, but it's not too bad. Yeah, I mean, it's pretty good. I mean, if you really need to have a spacious estate car, this car, isn't it? A superb Skoda Superb Estate, for example, has a much larger boot, but that's the price you pay for the sort of the fastback styling, and I think it's a pretty good compromise. Keyless entry, it's a great invention, but it hardly ever works in most cars. But let's try it with the C5X, shall we? So, getting out the car, walking away, and there we are. An audible bleep, thank the good Lord. The number of cars I drive where it's got keyless entry and you walk away and you think, is that car locked? So of course you walk back to the car and of course it's open. So you never know whether your car is locked or not. C5X though, works perfectly. Right then, what's it like behind the wheel? And this is the area where the C5X is probably going to be hugely different from how I remember it when I drove it in Spain. I mean, manufacturers choose the nicest roads when they launch a car because of course they want to show the car off in its best light, and the roads were wonderful. I mean, it was actually an XWRC stage, which is quite weird for a car that doesn't aim to be remotely sporty. But it was chosen because it was very smooth and quite undulating, and it did show the car off in a very good light. I should also say that that car that I drove in Spain was the plug-in hybrid version. There is a key difference. Not only is the plug-in hybrid version the quickest C5X in the model range, it's also the heaviest. What with those batteries powering the plug-in hybrid system, it's a pretty hefty old thing. And because of that, it's got a special version of Citroen's advanced comfort suspension. This car is the 1.2 petrol. So this and the standard 1.6 just get Citroen's advanced comfort suspension they've put into all of their most recent models. Now, not wanting to bore you, it's just a traditional spring with a hydraulic damper on the top. The plug-in hybrid gets adaptive dampers, so you can actually tweak how comfortable, how firm you want the suspension to be. And this and the 1.6 is just a standard setup. Now in Spain, that plug-in hybrid with its adaptive dampers rode absolutely beautifully. I mean, it did remind me of a Jaguar in terms of the ride comfort. I mean, it didn't handle like a Jaguar by any means, but it was just as comfortable as a big old Jag. Now, this is the first time I've driven the 1.2 with the standard hydraulic cushion, progressive cushions, that's what Citroen call it. And it is really good. I mean, it does get caught out on really big potholes, but for the most part, what Citroen say about this car in terms of it having like a magic carpet ride is accurate. In fact, I think this car has better ride quality than some cars costing double this car's price. It's just so consistent, so easy to waft around in. You can tell this is a 1.2, can't you? Because you get that 3-cylinder thrum Now it's the standard 1.2 3-cylinder, 130 horsepower engine Peugeot used, Citroen uses, now Vauxhall is using. It's used throughout the entire Stellantis range, and it's a very good engine. I mean, I'm a big fan of this engine, particularly in cars like the Peugeot 308 and 3008 and the Citroen C4. It's a good fit. With this car though, I don't think it's quite the marriage made in heaven. There's more than enough grunt, 130 horsepower. I mean, when you put your foot down, it does go. It's only a little bit behind the 1.6 petrol in the 0 to 62 acceleration times. The thing I don't like about it though is this is quite a heavy car, and there isn't quite enough torque to make that progress seem effortless. Another thing that I'm not entirely convinced about is the gearbox. It's an 8-speeder, just like you find in all the other cars that use this engine. And again, it's a bit dithery actually. It doesn't quite know which gear to choose. Of course, you can put it into manual mode. You can select manual down here on the center console, and you can use the paddles behind the steering wheel, and then the gearbox is better because of course you've got manual control and you can choose when you want to change gear, obviously, and so that is a better way of controlling this gearbox. Left in the auto setting, this particular car is not the best demonstration of how good that engine and how good this gearbox can actually be. The other thing I don't like about this engine is that 3-cylinder thrum. It's quite a nice noise actually for a 3-cylinder, and it's fine in a Peugeot 308 for example, but in something like this that's supposed to be a genteel, relaxing cruiser, that 3-cylinder sort of thrum is just at odds with what this car is about. It just jars a little bit for me. Just like I found in Spain, this is not a sports car. I mean, when you turn it into a corner, the body lollops around, because the tyres are pretty thin actually, it can lose sort of grip quite easily. But you don't buy this car. If you want a sporty kind of car like this, you buy a BMW 3 Series, don't you? Or a Mazda 6. I mean, it's pointless talking about how unsporting this car is, because you wouldn't be choosing this car to have a sporting kind of sensation. You wouldn't be considering it if you wanted a thrilling ride. I get all of that, but one thing I can't quite get is how stodgy the steering is. Now, you could say in virtually every single modern day car these days, because it's an electronic power assistance system, you know, electric power steering, that's what I'm trying to say, you don't get that feel, you don't get that bite. But at times in this car, you really have not got a clue what the front wheels are doing. The way you can cure that is by putting this car into sport mode. You've got 3 driving modes: Kel, Surprise, normal, eco and sport. When you put it in sport, the steering wakes up, and it just makes it a bit more pleasurable, sort of flinging this car around corners. The only problem with putting it in sport is that the gearbox tends to hold on to the revs a little bit longer, and like I've already said, it's a bit of a din actually. So it's probably better just to put it into normal and just put up with steering that feels like, well, it just feels a bit wishy-washy. I'm being a little bit too unfair, you could say, because this is an incredibly comfortable and refined car. Not only do you get the fancy suspension, but you get double thickness sort of sound accentuating, whatever it is, double thickness glass to reduce the amount of wind noise and tyre noise, and it does a pretty good job actually. And not only that, but you get these big comfy seats. I mean, proper big old-fashioned Citroen seats, aren't they? They're the kind of thing you'd expect to find in an old Citroen CX or an SM, and they really are lovely. They've got memory foam in them, so they do sort of mold themselves to your frame. The only thing I don't like about it is there isn't a huge amount of side support, so you do sort of find yourself with that lolloping suspension, you do find yourself sort of also lolloping around. And even though you get lumbar support, I mean, in this car we've got electric seats and we've got electric lumbar support. The lumbar support, I mean, it just doesn't really do anything. I mean, I can't really feel it. I can feel it just about working, but it doesn't really sort of kick into the small of your back like you find in most cars. But having said all of that, you do have a lovely driving position, a huge amount of adjustment in the steering wheel. This armrest is well placed, so is this one. And you just tend to find yourself just sitting here, kicking back and enjoying the ride. This is a lovely touch. The head-up display. Now, quite often with a head-up display, you've got to control. It's always in the wrong position for me. You find yourself burying yourself into the digital display here, trying to move it up a little bit, and it's a complete waste of time normally. But Citroen have thought of this, and the controller for that is on the electric mirror switch here. So you can just flip it round, and then now I can control it. I mean, it's such a clever idea. I don't know why more people don't do that. Brilliant. Another thing I have noticed while driving this car over the past few weeks is all of this piano black plastic here. Looks lovely, doesn't it? But of course, it easily scratches, gets covered in dust. I mean, it's a bit scratchy on this car already, and this is a brand new car. And also, what with this sort of silver bit here, and it is quite a high gloss piece of black plastic. I've been finding when I've been driving this car and the sun has been there or there, it bounces off that and absolutely blinds you. It's a small thing, but it's the kind of thing you notice when you live with a car for a period of time, and it's just annoying. At worst, it's distracting. Now, I've done close to 1,000 miles in this car over near enough 3 weeks in this car, and it's just been so lovely. I mean, it's been at home on the motorway, and I've really enjoyed getting behind the wheel of this car because it just offers something different. And that's the thing about the Citroen C5 X. In a world of pretty identical SUVs and saloon cars that pretty much try and do all the same thing, the C5 strikes out on its own path, and it does it so well. It drives nicely, it's comfortable, it's well made, the technology works. It even looks pretty smart. This is one of my favourite cars of the year. I stand by that.